Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 52 of What to Think, VentureBeat's weekly technology podcast. I'm Dylan Tweeney. I'm flying solo this week because my usual co-hosts are either unavailable or sick. This is actually the last episode of the What to Think podcast for a while, so I do hope you'll get in touch with me and let me know what you think of this podcast. And if you have ideas about what we should do in future episodes when we resurrect this a few weeks from now, I'd love to hear from you. You can follow me on Twitter at Dylan20, that's Dylan20, or send me email at Dylan, D-Y-L-A-N, at VentureBeat.com. This week we're going to be talking to Etan Lightstone. He's the VP of Design at New Relic, our host and sponsor. But before we get to Etan, I'm going to talk about some tech news highlights from VentureBeat.com, and I'll just go down the list real quick. The first thing I want to talk about is Tesla. In the past week, they launched Tesla Energy, a new line of batteries for your home and business. Now, these are not the kind of AA's that you might be thinking about, or 9 volts that you stick in your smoke detectors and have to replace every 6 months or so because the smoke detector is beeping at you. This is a new product called the Powerwall, and it's a gigantic battery, well, relatively speaking. Has 10 kilowatt hours of juice, and it's optimized for serving as a backup power source in case the grid goes down, or simply for daily use. Perhaps you're somebody who has a solar panel on your roof and you want to store power for when the sun is not shining because it's cloudy or because it's at night. You can connect the battery to your power grid or chain them up in a series so that you can add multiple kilowatts of power to your house. Tesla's pitch is basically if you have solar power or if you're driving an electric car, like maybe one of the Teslas, a Powerwall is a great addition to that grid. I think the consumer proposition is a little weak right now at $3,500 per battery plus installation costs. It's still pretty steep, and I think there's a minority of people who actually need this kind of solution. But as solar panels increase in penetration and more of us have them on the roofs of our houses, local power storage solution becomes more and more important because utilities, frankly, are just not set up to collect all the power that people might be generating through their solar panels. They don't often offer the best rates, and for people who want to get totally independent of the grid, some kind of storage is necessary. So in the long term, this is a great solution. It will mean all kinds of great things for the grid if they can be widely delivered. The question is how many customers they can find at $3,500 a pop plus installation. The Powerwall will start to be available in late summer is when deliveries will begin. Next up on our news list, Amazon made a small acquisition last week for a company called ClusterK. We don't know exactly how much they spent, but it was between $20 and $50 million, which is pretty good for an early stage startup that a lot of people had not heard about. But if you've been reading VentureBeat and following our enterprise and data reporter, Jordan Novett, you would know all about ClusterK. He actually got the scoop on the acquisition. ClusterK has a clever way to use Amazon Web Services and save money. With Amazon Web Services, you can either buy instances of servers that are persistent and sit there and you pay for them whether you're using them or not, or you can buy spot instances which kind of come and go, let you name a price for slices of servers in AWS. ClusterK devised a clever way to use spot instances to run applications as if you had a more persistent server. And the upshot was you could get your stuff running for about 1/10 the cost. Now, you're still running on Amazon Web Services and you're still paying Amazon, but you're paying them about 10% what you would have paid them otherwise. Naturally, Amazon took an interest in that, and I think quite cleverly and intelligently, they decided to acquire ClusterK and make that technology their own. There's no word yet as to whether they will continue the service, incorporate it into AWS in some way, or just quietly bury it and just, forget about this way of paying Amazon 1/10 what they used to pay. Next up, we had Jordan Novett, who I mentioned, our enterprise reporter, and Emil Prodolinski, who covers all kinds of news for VentureBeat. Both of them were at Build, Microsoft's annual conference in San Francisco last week. Among lots of other news at Build, Microsoft announced the name for its upcoming browser, and it will be called Microsoft Edge. Now, this is the successor to Internet Explorer, the much hated and unfortunately quite ubiquitous browser that has been around for many, many years. The successor was previously called Project Spartan, but the official name is now Edge. It will be shipping on all Windows 10 devices when that comes out later this year. That includes PCs, tablets, smartphones, and so on. Internet Explorer will still be available on Windows 10, but only for legacy use cases. And that's because Edge will have a focus on giving you a really good browsing experience without providing backwards compatibility to old sites that may have been coded for specific document types or coded to work with weird versions of Internet Explorer, which has caused numerous compatibility problems over the years across many different versions. The result of which is many websites have all kinds of little secret tweaks and bits of code in there to make them work with this version of Internet Explorer but not break that version while maintaining compatibility with Chrome and Firefox and so on. Edge is hopefully, Microsoft claims, going to cut through all that. It'll be a default browser. It'll be fast, standards compliant, and high performance. And if you need something that works strictly with Internet Explorer, like maybe your enterprise application that was coded just for that, well, you'll be able to use Internet Explorer. But Edge will be the default browser in most cases. Microsoft executive Joe Belfiore also said that developers will be able to take Chrome extensions and Firefox add-ons, make just a few changes, and run them on Microsoft Edge. And he demonstrated that with a Reddit extension originally built for Chrome. There's no better way to get the interest of the online masses than by showing them a browser plugin for Reddit. I think that was a pretty smart move, Joe. Good job. Before we go to our guest, I'm going to take a minute to thank our sponsor and host. The What to Think podcast is brought to you from the San Francisco headquarters of New Relic, which helps customers make sense of billions of data points about millions of applications in real time. Full disclosure, our guest this week is New Relic's VP of Design. More than 250,000 users are using their comprehensive cloud-based solution to analyze billions of data points per day across more than 4 million application instances. We're going to find out how that all fits together and how users can take that data and make sense of it through New Relic's visualizations when we speak to our guest. You can learn more about New Relic's offerings at newrelic.com. Now let's welcome our guest, Etan Lightstone. He's the VP of Design at New Relic. He oversees a team of talented designers, leads the user experience design strategy, and also contributes to the product code base at New Relic. Etan, welcome.
Thank you.
You have a new title, right? Recently promoted to VP of Design. Tell us about that.
So my title went from Director of Design to VP of Design or VP of Product Design.
Does that reflect a change in the way New Relic is thinking about design, or is it just that you're awesome?
Okay, I hope it's both. I think for a while I've been doing the role of a VP of Design, and this is kind of more of a recognition of that influence I've had for a while now. So,
what does that mean as opposed to being a director? Is it just more strategic, or?
It's a recognition from the executive team that design plays a critical role in our competitive advantage as a company. Mm-hmm. And, that design is an influencer of our product roadmap, just like the business strategy is, or our finance strategy.
Now, it's sort of interesting to hear you talk about that, because New Relic is not only an enterprise tool, where we haven't been accustomed to thinking about design in the enterprise, and I want to talk more about that, but it's also a developer tool, right? So your customers are primarily developers who are building apps and working with code, and yet you're thinking about presenting them with a nice design.
I guess I would make one slight correction. Being a developer tool and an enterprise tool can be the same thing. It's really about how your product scales to meet the needs of different types of customers. And some of them are these really big companies with many business units and ambitious demands about what they can achieve in the tools they use. And then, of course, there are startups who have a very different set of criteria that motivates them to invest in certain tools or products that they use. We definitely have a product that targets developers, and that has been our upbringing. As of recently, we've expanded kind of the scope of our product offering, and now we target business users as well. And that was what the New Relic Insights launch was all about.
Which is providing data about what customers are doing and how they're segmented and so forth, not to the developers, but to the business managers.
That's exactly right. And so now we have these two audiences that are technical as well as non-technical. And so in particular for the design team, this is a really exciting time because we get to look at a new kind of user and a whole new set of use cases. So those challenges are a lot of fun.
Do you have two different design philosophies for those two different kinds of users?
The philosophies for the two types of users, technical and non-technical, vary in more practical ways. And then there are the philosophies that guide our design decisions when it comes to targeting enterprise and non-enterprise. So that's probably another kind of interesting topic. In the case of the split between technical and non-technical end users, a lot of challenges around exposing query capabilities to non-technical users. How are they going to learn to do that? They probably want to explore data without having to deal with writing code. They want to be able to understand what's happening with their users in their software, but not have to really worry so much or understand deeply about the software and what's the architecture of it and what databases mean what. So there's a lot of kind of vocabulary changes. Part of what we're trying to do is bridge that gap. We want there to be this fluid communication that happens between business users and technical users where they work together to better serve their customers. And how does New Relic software support that workflow? In the old world, if you were to install an analytics tool and you need to add some new instrumentation or get something done, you're going to wait months for maybe the development team to add that instrumentation. And, we want to start narrowing that gap and making it a seamless experience for the two actors to kind of do what they want to do to better serve customers.
Now, you can probably use your own product to get feedback about how your customers are using the product too, right?
Is this the meta question? So is New Relic using New Relic to monitor itself?
Yes.
Absolutely.
How do you incorporate that and make it a feedback loop into your design process?
Doing research with customers is very expensive and time consuming, especially in the enterprise space.
Polling them or focus groups or what have you.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So getting face time with our enterprise customers, let's say, to watch their workflows, learn about their use cases, that's really important to do. We do want to do that, and we definitely do that. But we can also leverage our own internal needs as a thriving software company that has business users and technical users. And that has really helped the design team rapidly get quick feedback on workflows and situations that come up where, we learn where our software can meet a need we didn't realize was a need. So we do these kinds of hallway guerrilla tests where we'll just be working on a prototype or a mock-up and we'll just grab someone in the hallway who's, a product marketer and ask them what they think and have sort of an interview process with internal people in the company to kind of see what are the struggles in the tools they're using outside of New Relic and how can we, meet their needs. So it's been really advantageous to kind of use both of these research methods.
Once you've deployed a feature or a design tweak or something like that, do you actually collect data then from the end users? And then do you explicitly have meetings with your design team or something where you go over the data and say, we thought this was a great idea, but here's what people are actually doing?
Yeah, it's a constant thing.
Okay.
So whenever there's some kind of feature launch or product launch, we're doing whatever we can to use our own analytics to kind of see how it's being used within the workflows that we can see people using it in. That's the quantitative aspect of research, right? We couple that with the qualitative aspect. So just as an example, we embed a tool in our product called Ethno sometimes, and that allows us to, over the web, intercept someone who might be using our product and then pop up a message asking if they want to right then and there participate in a sort of ethnographic style study. So if they say yes to that, they'll answer like a little survey, and then our designer will get pinged and he or she will call the user and just start asking, okay, what are you doing today? And just watch them kind of interact with it.
I would imagine that is incredibly empowering and exciting for designers.
It is probably one of the most valuable methods that we use to get customer feedback. You just can't rely on asking a customer, like, what features do you want?
Right.
Sometimes they'll just kind of list off a bunch of metrics or charts they want. It doesn't really give you a sense of what is their workflow, what are their pain points,
right?
What are the things they subconsciously do they don't even realize they're doing, and the people they talk to. People don't work as little islands, right? They have to interact with others.
Right.
Can New Relic support that conversation they're having in their own workplaces?
Whereas if you get to them in the middle of actually doing something, they can be like, oh, I was actually copying and pasting some needed information from this field to this field because it's not wired up right or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, another way it's really valuable is with permission, we record a video and anonymize who that customer is. And we'll use it internally to show engineers how the things they've built are being used by customers and what's going really well and what are our customers struggling with.
Yep.
And it really establishes this great relationship, I think, between designers and engineers, which is a very important bond to us here.
There was a blog post you wrote recently where You said a designer without an engineer is an art gallery. An engineer without a designer is a parking lot.
Yeah.
It's about bringing those two together to make something that's functional and useful, right?
Exactly. They're both equally important to creating a minimally functional product. And functional to me means that it not only has the features it needs, but it fits a customer workflow and a customer use case, which is part of what product design is here to do.
You've talked about visualization, and I know it's an area that you focus on as well. And it obviously fits into presenting insights to New Relic's customers. But in general, not just within New Relic, how would you say the state of the art in data visualization stands right now? Is it looking pretty good? Are we still missing a lot of tools? Is it still kind of a black art like it was a few years ago?
I guess that's a two-part question. I say there's a technology component to your question. Do we have the right tools now to do the visualization work that we need to do?
Right.
And I think the other half of that is, are the design methodologies for good data visualization there? Like, is there more in the field to be learned and applied to doing business? I don't have a confident answer, but I can give you my best guess. When I started experimenting with data viz, the JavaScript tooling at the time, let's say 2002 or something, was pretty primitive. There was some really interesting projects coming up, like processing, which is a Java toolkit for doing data viz. The HTML specs in browsers were just starting to support things like scalar vector graphics and Canvas and stuff like that. But it was a struggle. And I think today we're seeing this ecosystem of development frameworks and tools. Like D3 is a great example. Have you heard of that one?
No, what's D3?
D3 is a JavaScript framework done by Bostock, who is, I think he's the guy that does data visualizations for the New York Times. He's a super famous guy.
Yeah.
And he opened that up, and it does two things, really. It's about manipulating data, and then it's about visualizing that data. And you can use existing modern browsers to do that because it relies on the SVG protocol. We use that a lot extensively to do prototyping now at New Relic. So that's just been something, we hadn't really done much of until 2011 or something here. And we'd done data visualizations, obviously. But the way we could rapidly experiment, that really kind of just came together fairly recently.
That's interesting.
I would say on the design side, there's a lot of literature out there in terms of good design practice and data visualization. I'm a student of Tufte, not literally, but
Edward Tufte, yeah, great writer and thinker on information visualization.
Stephen Few is another favorite of mine. Have you heard of Stephen Few?
No, new name. FEW?
FEW, yeah. He's a fantastic writer on data visualization. He's put out a lot of stuff recently, so it's fairly up to date. There's just principles there that are timeless and will always be applicable, even in the Minority Report future that we all see, coming with gesture-based UI and stuff.
Maybe even more important, because when you're surrounded by swarms of screens that you control with hand gestures, I would think that rendering that information very accessible is going to be important.
And of course, the other reality is simply the amount of information we have available to us now in the data stores we have now that are as fast as they are just accessible to everyone now. You needed an incredibly expensive data center mainframe to be able to even store some of the stuff that now any guy with a credit card can just go buy for a little bit of money on a cloud provider and start dealing with like a Hadoop cluster and do analysis. Or of course, New Relic is trying to make that even more accessible.
Yes.
And so with that accessibility to enormous amounts of data, the pressure is on. These data visualizations are now being tested to the extreme.
Right. Do you think they're accessible enough? I mean, I've seen a lot of great stuff by the likes of, Mike Bostock at the Times, but those tend to be very boutique kinds of creations, right? So are we reaching a point where those kinds of visualizations are more accessible to people who aren't of his caliber, who don't have a New York Times design department behind them?
The New York Times is a great example. I think they're famous for making complicated to understand data sets accessible. So I think they've achieved that. The question is, that kind of work is very much about sending a message to people. And the kind of work that we do here is about serving someone's workflow or helping them make a business decision.
Yes, so they can explore and compare.
Or deal with situations that we can't predict come up that they'll need to explore in their data sets.
Yes, very good distinction.
One of the risks is that there's all this momentum of doing sort of these aesthetically amazing data visualizations or these beautiful network diagrams. or as you call it, these boutique style, data viz things. And a lot of the principles that go into that are great if you want to make something gorgeous and accessible. But in our case, sometimes it's the less gorgeous solution that's just the easy and most well understood solution.
Right.
So, I've seen these kind of artworks put up that are these like fancy heat map based grid things that look gorgeous. A favorite one I brought up a few months ago was the outbreaks that were recorded for, I think it was measles, in the last 80 years or something like that, or 100 years. It was this beautiful visualization, and everyone loved it. And then as I kind of analyzed it for myself, I realized it's actually a terrible visualization if you want to use it to do your work, whatever your work is. So I imagined an end user like someone who works maybe at the Center for Disease Control, who's trying to figure out where populations are spreading the disease and how it's spreading and that kind of stuff. And you start to poke all these holes in it. And so I did this talk recently at the Hadoop Strata conference, and I asked the room to evaluate the visualization with me, and it was actually a really fun exercise.
So that's really interesting. Just because something is pretty, or just because it works really well for one particular application, maybe presenting something in a newspaper,
right,
doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for somebody who actually has to work with that data.
And I think to take that message further, it's that a lot of the design principles you might apply to that kind of boutique style visualization design don't necessarily apply as well, and you have to follow a much more task-oriented design exploration when it comes to data viz for the kind of work we do.
Got it. I want to move from visualization back to enterprise software design, and we have just a couple minutes left. So I'm going to start with the premise, and maybe you can contest this if you disagree, but the premise that user experience and design have become much more important in enterprise software than ever before, thanks to the advent of consumerization and try before you buy, and targeting business people rather than IT people.
That is definitely a belief we have here. The design practice for enterprise has really shifted over the last few years in a big way. And I think there are two major components to this. One is a cultural component, and one is a technology component. And I think you kind of said a little bit of that just now. So the try before you buy stuff, the freemium model.
Yes.
Really, that comes down to a technological capability where enterprise customers are now adopting SaaS-based tools. And previously, they were really only using on-prem, really expensive implementations.
It costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time just to even get it set up to look at it the first time.
That's exactly right. And it's very difficult to move off of that onto something else.
Yeah.
And with a SaaS model, it's just so cheap to adopt new software, and freemium is so easy to provide that, the competition between these kinds of tools used by enterprise is a lot higher. And now user experience has just become naturally one of these major competitive items, that's considered when someone's trying to pick a vendor. Kind of like when I was talking about D3, there's a lot of technology now that makes it easier and faster to produce well-designed software. And I'm not saying it would be automatic. You just hit a button and use the right framework, and all of a sudden your software is well-designed. But certainly the barrier to entry is a lot lower now, just to be able to quickly fire up a prototype with one developer, one designer really rapidly and make something great.
Yes.
And on the cultural side, we're seeing a lot of newer people get into enterprise companies who have much higher expectations of the software they use. I have to give you my favorite story. So the guy I report to at New Relic is the SVP of product, Jim Gochi, and he told me this great story. In 2008, they were demoing one of the early versions of New Relic at a little developer meetup group. And at the end of it, this woman raised her hand and stood up and said, "Thank you for putting some effort into the UI." Her exact words are something like, "I would have used it anyways, but it was really nice that you guys put in the extra effort to make it, good usability and stuff like that." And I thought that was hilarious. And to me, that just spoke to this realization that it really is a recent change. It's been a gradual change, but it's really accelerated lately, and attitudes have changed, and younger people who are used to, swiping their phones. Or I see my niece, she's 2 years old, and she's trying to swipe the TV with her finger. She already has all these expectations of what it's going to be like to interact with products around her.
Yeah.
So that's part of the, I think, cultural change that's going on.
Right. Whereas those of us who've been around a little bit longer are already used to being punched in the face like daily by the UIs that we have to deal with at work. Right?
I love that analogy. I mean, have you ever used software? And I won't pick on anyone in particular, but it's still out there today. And it's like a tool you're using, I don't know, to book a flight or something, let's say. And as you're using it, you just realize they don't care about me.
Yeah. I've used countless content management systems in my life as a journalist, publishing platforms that look, the website looks beautiful and slick and professional on the front end where people are reading it. But the editors and writers are just like, you have to slog through, these horrible, horrible forms and weird quirks and oddities. And
as end users are almost an afterthought. At least that's the feeling.
That's exactly right. All right, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you really quickly, if you don't mind, grading a few enterprise companies' UIs. I hope this doesn't cause professional problems for you, but Dropbox.
1 to 10 scale?
Sure.
For consumer, I'd say 10.
That's good, right?
That's great.
Okay.
For business, I'm going to give it a 7.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Zendesk.
9.5.
Ooh, since we're talking about visualization, I want to ask you about a couple. Domo.
I'm not familiar with Domo, so I mean,
okay. Do you want to throw in another BI tool like Good Data or Looker? Or...
Okay, I'll pick on Google Analytics. I will give them, for the average user, an 8 because of just how powerful and accessible it is, but I'll give it a 7 for the professional user.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
I'm going to disagree. I think Google Analytics is really difficult to use. It's one of those tools that I would use anyway because it sucks, and for me it does suck. So I'm giving Google Analytics a 3.
Maybe I bell curve these things. And I think that's because I know what it's like to make something like Google Analytics.
Okay.
And it is hard. It is so hard. And anyone who happens to listen to this who's like a designer at Google Analytics, you're awesome.
You've done so much for me too, but I'm just, I run up against limitations every day. All right, let's move on. Salesforce.com.
Yeah, we use Salesforce, first of all. It's an invaluable tool. I mean, it really is. I do not use it personally, but I've heard complaints. It's a bit of a mess, is what I've heard.
Oracle.
The whole company?
I don't know. Pick a database.
The thing that comes to mind is maybe my past life as a developer in I'll say 2003 roughly, where I did actually use the Oracle database tool sets.
Yes.
And I'll give it a 2.
Okay, yeah, that's the world that we're coming from, right?
Yeah, so I have not played with much Oracle stuff.
I'm sure they're better than that by now. Okay, and New Relic.
I'll let my customers be the judge of that. How about that?
That's a great answer. Very politic. All right. Etan, thank you so much for joining us for the What to Think podcast. Best of luck in improving the UI of your product and helping people use it better.
Thank you so much, Dylan. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us for What to Think, VentureBeat's technology news podcast. This is actually the last time we'll be doing this podcast for a while. We're taking a brief break while we decide what direction we're going to take the podcast in next. So it may be a few weeks before you hear from us again. But if you want to be surprised, just subscribe to us in iTunes or look for us on Stitcher or SoundCloud. We're in all of those places. And of course, you can follow VentureBeat at VentureBeat.com. I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email if you have ideas about topics that I should tackle in a future podcast. I'm Dylan at VentureBeat.com. Talk to you later.